Go ahead.
Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Cause and Lunch and Learn. For those of us on the West Coast, it's a breakfast and learn. We're really excited to have you here today, and given the conditions we find ourselves in, I really did want to just take a moment of silence as a group. Thank you all in your capacities for what you are doing right now as nurse educators and helpers, and to think about our healthcare professionals and all the other essential folks out there who are helpers in this crisis situation. This group has been working together for quite a while now, and this webinar has been in the planning for months, so it does feel very timely. The other caveat I want to take is to state that simulation will never replace clinical practice. I think a lot of people are fearful. There are many changes occurring even now. It is meant to be an enhancement. It is meant to be a new way to get ourselves as faculty rejuvenated and our students excited. So I'll let you just sit for a moment in Thanksgiving and with the knowledge of what we'll head forward to. Thank you for that. Today, we're really excited to bring some incredibly talented folks together to share with you about virtual simulation and the community of learning. The steering committee is presenting here. I am Suzanne Campbell, Associate Professor at the University of British Columbia. I'm also Vice President of the International Nursing Association for Clinical and Simulation Learning, some of you know as INACSL, on their board of directors until June. And I am really a novice in this world of virtual simulation gaming, but very excited to learn more. So we're excited to share with you today. Our speakers include Margaret Verkel, who's a professor at Centennial College and an adjunct lecturer at the University of Toronto. She's a leader in developing and researching virtual simulations. These simulations have won 9 prestigious local, national, and international awards. While gaining international attention, the virtual gaming simulations are pervasive in nursing education globally. Most recently, she developed an open access virtual healthcare experience with 6 different virtual gaming simulations. She's published numerous articles, which we will be sharing some of those references with you today, in peer-reviewed journals, and authored a book chapter on virtual simulation. Her work is disseminated at national and international conferences, and for the past 3 years, she has been chair of this virtual simulation community of learning. Our next presenter, Kimberly Bontanen, is an instructor at the DSN program and experiential learning coordinator across health sciences at Douglas Colleges in Coquitlam, British Columbia. She's currently involved in a multi-site provincial study of the global interprofessional therapeutic communication scale with myself as primary investigator. Kim is currently on the board of directors for Simulation Canada, co-treasurer for Western Canada Health Science Educators, and secretary for the Virtual Simulation Community of Learning. She enjoys all of the other outdoor activities on the beautiful west coast of Canada, and I believe Margaret shared biking and hiking, being outdoors, as her enjoyable area. And finally, we have Dr. Barbara Wilson-Keats, who's an academic coordinator in the Faculty of Health Disciplines at Athabasca University and Online and Open University. She's an educator and clinician. Her research program examines the use of simulation as an innovative teaching pedagogy in both real classrooms and clinical, as well as online virtual learning environments. As a previous simulation lead at the University of Alberta, Dr. Wilson-Keats is a known consultant for healthcare providers and faculty on debriefing, scenario script writing, and virtual simulation in an online and large classroom environment. If you're a member of INACSL, please vote for her as the new Vice President International. So without further ado, we did place these questions in the chat box initially that you see up here in front of you. I will be doing my best to moderate the questions throughout, and we're hoping to have a hearty 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the presentation to answer your questions. So without further ado, I will hand it over to my colleagues.
Thank you, Suzanne. It's Barbara Wilson-Keith here, and welcome everyone to our webinar on Virtual Simulation Community of Learning. We're so excited that you've been able to join us this morning. At the end of the webinar, we hope that you will be able to understand the definition and advantages of virtual gaming simulations, to describe the development of virtual gaming simulations, and to increase awareness of open access online virtual gaming simulation resources available to Canadian schools and faculties of nursing. And when we say open access, we mean free, which is always works for everybody's budget, which is a great thing about these resources that we're going to show you. As Suzanne mentioned, please feel free to add your questions or comments into our chat box. There are three main types of virtual simulation, or VS. The first one is a wearable virtual reality device. So an example of this would be an Oculus headset, which allows participants to look around and navigate within a seemingly physical world. A computer two-dimensional graphic game or image, the image is on the computer in 2 dimensions. So it's just like watching a movie on your phone or on your iPad. It's 2D and you see length and width, but you're unable to rotate objects and you're unable to get that feeling of being immersed into that world. Computer 3D, if you've ever been to a 3D movie, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So you can rotate objects sometimes, you can move them around, you can move around, which is much more lifelike than an actual 2D game, virtual or computer game. And an avatar is a computer-generated representative of a participant in this virtual simulation world. We're going to talk today about the third type of virtual simulation, and those are virtual gaming simulations, or VGS. And those are immersive educational games that are played on a computer that simulate clinical experiences. So taking the role of the nurse, students then watch the film or computer-generated clip of nurse-client encounters in order to make clinical decisions and to experience the consequences of those decisions. It's important to remember that these are formatted as a game. And when you use a gaming format, you introduce conflict into that scenario. So when students are asked to make a choice between behaviors they would do, actions they would take first, what would you say to this client, there's some conflict going on or some tension going on within that student to think through these clinical decisions and then to see the consequences of their decisions. I was on a call yesterday, a webinar yesterday with the Society of Simulation in Healthcare, and they referred to our current situation as a paradigm shift. And this is certainly apt for everybody in Canada as well that teach, particularly nursing education. So because of the COVID-19 pandemic, you probably had to pull your students out of clinical. You're not sure how students are going to get their clinical placements, their clinical experiences. And there's also an overall lack of clinical placements for students. So virtual simulation certainly gives you an option, and as Suzanne mentioned, it becomes an adjunct or it enhances clinical experience. So some programs in Canada have students from a large geographical area. They're located across the country. That's particularly within my program, Athabasca University. We have students from BC all the way to Newfoundland and up into the north. So virtual simulation allows us to give those students access to a simulation experience while ensuring patient safety. So you're not putting actual patients at risk, but you are ensuring that patient safety. That's so very important. Clinical placements these days, it's very difficult to get specialized placements. And that's particularly true within, I always think of pediatrics. So most programs don't have a specialized pediatric placement because we just don't have the clinical placement for that. And also, virtual simulation allows you to ensure that students get an opportunity to experience similar clinical experiences. So these may be high-risk, low-occurrence experiences or clinical events that they may participate in. An example is a cardiac arrest, an angry patient or family member, or a postpartum hemorrhage. And if you ever have worked in a physical simulation lab, you know that there's increased costs and resources are needed for that lab, as well as you probably can only take about 8 students through at a time. So those physical simulation labs with mannequins and other task trainers become very expensive very quickly. So I'm just going to highlight a few advantages around virtual learning and virtual simulation of learning. So there's, particularly within the last 2 weeks, there's been a massive increase in online learning. So students of the Generation X and the future generations, they are used to learning online. They're very technologically savvy, very comfortable using technology. Virtual simulation, it ensures consistent clinical experiences within a psychologically safe environment and also ensures patient safety as well. The scenarios that are created replicate real life, and they allow the students to develop clinical skills and also to see the consequences of their errors and the outcomes of their decisions. Students can play games repeatedly, and the games are accessible to all. All you need is an internet. You can play it on a phone, you can play it on a computer, you can play it on an iPad. There's no problem. So, and quite often students will play a game over and over and over again. And students quite like that because they can make different decisions each time they play, and they can see the consequences and the outcomes of those decisions. Even though, like, when you look back at physical lab space, physical simulation lab space, you can only accommodate 8 students at a time. And students, if they're lucky, they get to go into, to be with a certain a mannequin for maybe 5 or 10 minutes at the most. So these games, you can really accommodate large numbers of students also in various locations. So if you have students located even across Metro Toronto, then you can easily accommodate large numbers of students without that demands on a physical space. Because you have less demands for physical space, you have reduced costs, there's less resources to develop, maintain, and implement and evaluate virtual simulation learning. So I'm going to talk to you about our website. So this is, we are the Virtual Simulation Community of Learning. This was developed in 2016 when a group of Canadian nurse faculty established an accessible online environment to promote knowledge, learning, and opportunities to advance virtual simulation in nursing education. I'm just going to walk you through the website a little bit because the Adobe Connect here doesn't allow me to link directly to it. So we developed this group because we wanted to promote collaboration, support the development of virtual simulation initiatives Canada-wide. We wanted to establish a virtual environment to promote the sharing of resources, to promote the awareness, the development, and the use of virtual simulation in nursing education, and also to foster collaboration in faculty development and research initiatives in the field of simulation, and particularly in the field of virtual simulation. We have a list of available scenarios. These scenarios are free to use. You can go use the link and go directly into the game. Each scenario is described, tells you what audience it should be used for, and different information around how to make it easy to access, as well as Marg's email that you can certainly access and ask her any questions. This scenario, particularly the virtual healthcare experience, is a great scenario. I love it. It's really a lot of fun to play. We also have an area of the website that is talked about published articles. So these are published articles of our members. Our members the names are bolded, so you can easily find them. And this is a really good place to start if you're not too sure about what the literature is saying about virtual simulation. Within, the Canadian group is certainly probably the only group within North America that is doing a lot of work around virtual simulation. There's not a lot of research being done in the States or in other countries around virtual simulation. So this is exciting to be part of this group. Finally, we do offer workshops, community and faculty development workshops. They're usually a 2-day workshop. And we show you how to write a scenario. We show you how to film it, how to look at it, how to make it into a game format. All you need is a cell phone camera and free open access software. So there's really very little cost involved in developing and creating a scenario. So these are people attend. We have educators from elementary schools all the way to universities. And it gives you an opportunity to apply your knowledge and problem solving in realistic workplace solutions. So it allows you to create what you need for your students. And I'm going to now turn it over to Mark, who's going to talk about our show you a trailer, we hope. We have the technology to do that. So it may take a few minutes. So we'll just have a look at the questions here. The PowerPoint is going to be available, so there's the PowerPoint presentation is being recorded, so we will make that available to you. Oh, yeah.
I can go ahead and press play now?
Absolutely.
Yep, go ahead.
And Suzanne, you ready? Why is the play button not showing up? Play.
I'm ready when you are.
Okay. Okay, started.
Yours is not moving forward.
What do you want? As I said at the door, my name is Ann Jones. I'm a nurse who visits families in the community. Would you like to sit down? Do you want some tea? Oh, look at those bruises.
Who is she? What is she doing here?
I have to call the Children's Aid Society.
You will take Sasha away from me?
Get out! What's best for you is to end your relationship with Joseph.
What will you write down? I don't want you writing anything down.
Shut up! You're too stupid to know anything!
I'll visit you some other time.
He does not have the key to the building or to the apartment. So that's it? Some pamphlets and a card?
You have to watch your tone of voice.
Get out!
If you need any help before then, you have my business card, so you can contact me at that number. What time can you come?
This is an example of one of our virtual gaming simulations that are available in our virtual community of learning. This simulation has been around since 2013, and interesting to note that on March 1st we had 50 users play this game, and on March 24th we had 2,204 users in a 24-hour period. So they're being taken up throughout mainly North America, but we have about 43 different countries using our virtual experience like that. One of the things we do as a virtual community of learning is share resources like that, items that we've done as faculty and we've created for others to use. But we also share how do you embed virtual experiences to optimize learning. And there's no real best practices totally with this, so we're going to just walk through just give you highlights on what to think about when you're going to embed those virtual experiences in your education, like many of us are planning to do. So the first thing that is so important is that there are clear learning objectives, that you look at the learning objectives of the virtual experience to ensure they align with your curricular outcomes. You know, some of these are really exciting to play and students really enjoy it, but it's more about, is the learning meeting the learning needs of your students at this time? And they see it, and of course you do too, and that's how you want to make sure there is a nice alignment. We also know that there's limited faculty development. There isn't modules to go through on how to embed them in curriculum. Instead, there's a number of articles that we are being published very shortly about how do you train faculty, what does that look like. A few hints are things like, how do you get faculty on board to actually play these to use these virtual simulations. Right now we have the pandemic that of course is encouraging us all to look at ways virtually to meet clinical practice needs. So we have a huge impetus of people who really want to try these out. But with faculty development also comes encouraging faculty to try it out, to play it themselves, to go through incorrect and not so correct answers, to see the learning that takes place, to also encourage who's ever leading it or your champion to be that super trainer that helps with technology issues, that really helps faculty look at the experiences and where it should be in that curriculum. A lot with faculty development is even looking at where it's best planted in the curriculum, but also how to do it. And we're going to talk about those few things as we go forward. One of the big decisions when you embed it in curriculum is, do you grade it or not? We did a survey of faculty across North America that were using virtual simulation in education, and most did not provide a specific grade for it. Many of them provided a participation mark. And in our experience embedding virtual experiences in our courses, we have said to our students, if you don't play the virtual game, you actually lose 1% of your final grade. So it's not high stakes. And one of the reasons a lot of faculty are not supportive of grading virtual experiences is because you actually want the student, the user, to play around, to make wrong mistakes and see what the consequences are. If you looked at our virtual game that we showed, every time you make a decision, you actually see consequences of that decision, whether it's the right one or wrong one. So students from our research will say we actually learned more making wrong mistakes in the virtual game than the right choices we made. So that was one of our things. But there are some universities and colleges and nursing programs in North America, a very select few, that actually grade it. And students are given a grade on their game. And if you looked at the video, you saw at the very end, you get a summary report of how well you did. That's really the learner's analytics, how well they did in the game, every decision they made, and whether it was right or wrong. So really, when you talk about a faculty and embedding it, you have to think, what is the grade? And students need to know this. They need to know if they're given a grade for this and what the grade looks like. In that pre-brief, we also know this, is that when we use virtual experiences, we need to make sure that we have covered the content, that students come with already prerequisite knowledge or skills. Virtual simulation is not meant for teaching, it's meant for applying knowledge. So having that really clear with the pre-brief on what is the expectations coming in before playing the game. Also in the pre-brief would be what is the grade you get, or how is this marked, or what does it mean. Also in that pre-brief should be technology. So as faculty are worried about technology, what we know from studies is that when students get a experience online, a virtual experience, and it doesn't work properly or doesn't load properly or something happens, even though it's an amazing experience, they say it was a poor experience because it didn't work. So it's so important that we make sure there is someone to support them technology. For example, in our games, with our studies, we have found out that our games don't work really well with Microsoft Edge or the Microsoft web browsers for whatever reason. So we tell students, you know, use Firefox or Chrome or something like that, or if they're having trouble, try a different browser. Things like that you want to troubleshoot ahead of time before students are required to play the game, the experience. You also want to share with them in the pre-brief how the enactment works out. So the enactment really is what's the format for playing our virtual game. So in this study that we did and we shared that's published, we looked at a couple different ways of playing the games. And one is an individual activity. So I think right now with COVID-19, a lot of what we'll be asking our students to do is an individual activity. So they play it on their own and at their own convenience, in their own time, when they're ready to listen to hear it. And they make all the decisions themselves. So there is an advantage of them playing it by themselves because they actually get to assess their own knowledge and not the group's knowledge. The other way to play it, and that this format talks about, is actually in pairs, and that people do it together. And they said the advantage of a pair doing a virtual simulation was that when it came to a decision, they actually talked about the decision and they learned from each other through chatting about it. The other option is, of course, a small group. And I would say to you, if you're doing web classes, you could actually pull up these games and start to go through it, and when there's a decision, ask your class, what should we do? Have a discussion about it, make choices together, and see what the consequences are. And they have been played in large class settings also, actually. And again, when you do it with larger groups, even virtually, you have to really think about how are you going to decide which decision to make. Are you going to do a group consensus? Are you going to do the loudest voice? And how do you facilitate the conversations as you're playing it? So the biggest challenge, of course, with virtual experiences, especially if it's an individual activity and you're not there, is how do you debrief it? What we learned from some of our initial studies, we actually had our students play that mental health game a couple of years ago for the first time. We have over 500 students that played it. They played it as an individual activity. And as you saw in the game, there's rationale throughout. So whenever you make a wrong choice, you see the consequences of your action, then you actually get a rationale, on an evidence-based rationale on why it's not the best response. And at the very end, you get a summary report of every decision you made. And in that game, you saw you actually had links to the online modules where that content's explained, so a student can make a learning plan on what they need to know and have resources on how to rectify their knowledge or whatever challenge they had. And so we studied students and we said, you know, how was this for you? And they came to our focus groups in droves because they said, we want to really talk and reflect more on the experience. It wasn't enough just getting the feedback and the summary report at the end. Many of our virtual experiences have similar things, feedback throughout and a summary report at the end or explanations at the end. And I would challenge you, if you're going to use them, don't forget about the debrief. We know that in-person simulation, debriefing is where most of the learning occurs. And so debriefing, many will say, is the most important part of the in-person simulation. This is true, we're finding, with virtual simulation. The challenge, of course, is how do you debrief a virtual experience, especially in this day and age? And we're going to talk a little bit about 3 different kinds, and I'm just going to explain these kinds to you. With us, self-debrief was there was no active educator, facilitator, with a group. The student itself got debriefing questions that were based on a framework of debriefing. And in our studies, we used a 3D model of debriefing. So they were given, and at the end of all our virtual experiences that I've helped create, we have a self-debrief form that a student can reflect on their experience afterwards. Just a note, whenever we debrief virtual experiences, we ask students to take their summary report of how they did in order to inform their debrief, whether it's a self-debrief or a group debrief. And so the advantage, of course, of the self-debrief is that you can do it individually, anywhere, anytime for students. Although, if you're going to do a self-debrief, we encourage our students to do it as soon as after the experience as possible, while their emotions are still raw, while they still think and they've just had clear in their mind the decisions that they've made and why they might have made it. The other debriefing experience we've looked at is a synchronous virtual debrief, and that, of course, is very timely. We can go in a web conference like this one and have our students there after their completed experience and debrief it as a group, and very, very similar to how you would in an in-person experience. There's a little bit written, Gordon has written a bit on asynchronous debrief, and that would be like a discussion board or asynchronous times that students can go in at their most convenient time to respond to questions. And of course, you can do an in-person debrief after a virtual experience if you are able to get together in person, so post-COVID times. We actually researched these different areas of debriefing, and we compared debriefing methods with virtual experience. And in this one, we studied 200 students, and we put one group in the self-debrief group, one group in the virtual synchronous debrief group, and we used a web conferencing system for that, and we used the guidelines through an ASCO debriefing in order to inform how to run that with a facilitator and so forth. And we did an in-person group debrief, which is, we consider, the gold standard and the most research that's been done, a small group debrief. And the result of this rigorous study was that you actually have options on ways to debrief your virtual experience. It demonstrated, and we looked at self-efficacy, we looked at knowledge, and we looked at the debriefing experiences. And all of them made pre-post gains in self-efficacy and knowledge, and they all rated their debriefing experience fairly highly. What was really interesting, though, is the students in the self-debrief alone had the lowest scores when it came to things like guidance and being unable to resolve feelings and questions. And I guess this isn't really a surprise because they don't have a debriefing facilitator with them. So we kind of explored the different groups that we did, self-debriefing, virtual debriefing, and in-person debriefing. But what we found that fascinated us was the outcome of deep, authentic reflection that occurs in the self-debrief group. And so while this was surprising to us, it also made sense that the self-debrief actually offers an opportunity to really analyze your own decisions without being influenced by anybody else. And that's what students said. Like, when I self-debrief, I looked at my summary report, those analytics of the game. I had my notes with me that I was required to do before playing the virtual experience, and I was really able to critically analyze how I did throughout the game. So we kind of thought, well, what would happen if we combined debriefs? What if we combined self-debrief or did it alone with other debriefing options? And again, we had over 200 students in this, and what we did is 254 or something. We had one group to self-debrief alone, one group to self-debrief, and then an in-person small group debrief, and one group to self-debrief, and then an in-person large group debrief. And I think for these COVID times, you can think, you know, maybe those group debriefs are virtual synchronous debriefs instead of the in-person debriefs during this time. And it was fascinating. What we found is that students in the self-debrief for small and large group debriefs, we also asked them to rate their experience of having that written debrief before going into their assigned group debrief. And the majority, over 80%, said the self-debrief was very helpful. And fewer than 3% said it was not helpful. Conversely, they felt that the group debrief was actually better as a result of having the self-debrief. When we asked them to explain a bit more, students identified that the self-debrief helped them organize their thoughts, and then it actually prepared them to engage in the group debrief discussion and actively listen to others. So they were more able to listen to other people in that group debrief if they had, as opposed to times they'd gone straight into a group debrief. A participant wrote, "I was able to understand how I felt about the experience before discussing it with a group." One of the advantages of that self-debrief, and especially in this climate, if you ask students to play the virtual game by themselves, is that they're able to self-debrief on their own. They can capture those raw emotions and their decisions before, and with this study, it was within a week or two, we had a group debrief. And it's interesting to note that participants felt the self-debrief helped them listen to others more closely and reflect more. What we do know, though, is that the group debrief alone had a less satisfactory debriefing experience and had lower debriefing experience scale scores than students that had both of them together. The other interesting finding was those that did the self-debrief then went on to do a group debrief actually spent more time in that self-debrief because they really wanted to be prepared for that group debrief experience. So definitely this is really, really important to consider debriefing and how you're going to debrief these experiences and what it looks like. I'm going to pass it over now to Kim Boynton.
Okay, so there are many applications for virtual simulation games in nursing education, and Margaret just touched on a few in a previous slide. And here are a few more ideas and options. When assigning games to individual learners, there are several options, some of which could include assigning the individual learners to play the game as a preparation for an in-person experience, such as a lecture, a lab, or a sim. You could assign individual learners to play the game, self-debrief using the questions, and then submit a reflection on their performance using a feedback log. Individual learners could also play the game, then attend a synchronous or asynchronous debrief, and that could be in person or online using a platform that's integrated into your learning management system like Blackboard Collaborate or something supported by your institution like Zoom. When working through virtual games with larger groups of learners, some ideas could include in class having small groups of learners play the game as a tabletop class activity and follow that up with a facilitated debrief by the educator. You could allow all of the learners to choose the next action anonymously by submitting their answer using a student response system like iClickers or Kahoot before having either a student lead or the facilitator unfold the scenario. And then another interesting application for nursing and timely at the moment would be using some of the shorter games to begin post-conference clinical debriefing discussions and so on. Sorry, my slide there. So according to Canadian innovator, educator, and public speaker George Couros, and in line with our current state of change, change is an opportunity to do something amazing. And the virtual simulation community of learning is here to help you in this change toward virtual simulation. There are many benefits of an online Canadian nurse educator virtual simulation community of learning. We meet online, and that is the perfect tool for staying connected across the country, with many of us developing our initial relationships with one another online, and then gathering in person at conferences, networking events, education sessions as often as we can. And our time together online isn't so much another meeting, but a bringing together of educators who are scattered across the country to share common interests and problem-solve common needs in relation to virtual simulation gaming development and the impact that has on teaching and learning. This time provides us with an opportunity to collaborate, commiserate, brainstorm, and most importantly, solve problems and share resources in a communal context. This nudges all of us along, encouraging and inspiring us to stick with our projects and learn new tools while maintaining a pedagogical approach to teaching and learning. We asked our current members to highlight what the benefits of participation were, and the top 3 themes emerged: learning, sharing, and mentoring. In this online collaborative venue, they said that we learned from one another's successes and challenges, or frankly, mistakes. Working together on creating timely topics for new virtual simulation games. Participating in creating games together. Sharing resources and strategies for implementing technology-supported teaching and learning. Sharing what we've been working on and testing out our new ideas for peer review. We appreciate the support for faculty new to simulation, new to virtual simulation, in moving from novice to expert. Encouraging each other to keep working toward our goals, even when it's quite challenging and the workload is demanding. Keeping each other apprised of opportunities like grants, conferences, webinars, discussing virtual simulation pedagogy, scholarship and research, and how to build collaborative research teams and replicate studies to increase validity and reliability within this new area of simulation research. So, how do you get involved with this amazing community? First, gain access through the CanSim website using the hyperlink in this slide. Explore the free online games and resources under the Virtual Simulation Community of Learning tab. Then, email me, Kim Bontnan, at the email address listed here to be added to our next meeting, which will be held virtually April 28, 2020 at 1100 Eastern Standard Time or 0800 Pacific Time. At the moment, we are looking for additional steering committee members across Canada from schools of nursing. There are territories and provinces in which we don't currently have representation, so a warm invitation to our dear colleagues from the Yukon, Northwest Territories, Nunavut, Newfoundland, PEI, Quebec, and Saskatchewan. In addition to steering committee, general membership is greatly valued. And then I think back over to you, Barb.
Thanks, Kim. So this is just some other resources that are out there, particularly in terms of the COVID-19. The Anaxel Virtual Learning Resources, it's a website and a page of many, many different resources you can use. They give you free access to other virtual simulation resources as well as webinars to watch and information, educational updates for sure. And last week, Simulation Canada also put out a page for specifically COVID-19 simulations. And I watched a couple of those yesterday, and there was one that was about sort of a game around donning and doffing PPE, which was, I did pass, which was great. It really made me think, though. And also hand washing. So those are the two big areas, particularly for healthcare workers and future RNs as we go forward in our nursing education. So those are just a few of the two websites that I know of where you can find online resources. And are there any questions? I know Suzanne's been trying to answer them as she goes along.
So Barbara, I'm going to take the mic back here and moderate. I want to thank our fabulous speakers for a really whirlwind presentation. They covered a lot of information. Thanks to all of you for sharing where you're from. We're being told the Anaxel link is broken, so someone behind the scenes will look into that. But I want to thank our speakers because they kept this to 45 minutes. So we actually have a full 15, and we're told that there isn't anything else going, so we have plenty of time to answer questions. I just want to reiterate, because they did such a lovely job, I think, of describing some of the benefits of being part of this community of learning, and speaking from a provincial, national, and international perspective myself with some of the research teams and teaching and scholarship projects I've been involved. There's something about being involved with a group of like-minded individuals who are as passionate about something as you are. As you can tell by the expertise each of our three presenters brought, they come from a variety of institutions. They have different expertise backgrounds, whether that's specific disciplines or areas of expertise. And the community is all about supporting each other and growing together. So I'm going to kick off because I looked for questions, and a lot of people wanted to know about all the other resources, so I think we can get into that. But I'd like to hone us in with a first question, which is about templates. I have done a lot of my work with high fidelity simulation and very carefully written out and scripted scenarios based on the INACSL best standards. I'm curious to the team, and you can decide who'd like to take this, but I think, Marg, you might be the first person to answer about templates available. So I want to get started. What do I do?
So if you want to create your own virtual gaming simulations, we actually have designed a course, and we've written articles on how to do them. Just the one thing we've really realized as developers of these experiences is that it takes a team. You can never do it on your own. With us, we have items such as we have a web designer, we have a videographer, because ours are not avatar-based, so we need that videographer. We have subject matter experts, and we have project managers that help us. So it really, too, depends what level and how much money, of course, you have on who needs to all be involved. We have written about it in the, if you look at the Journal of Clinical Simulation Nursing, we wrote an article on developing virtual gaming simulations. I think it was published in July of last year. We've written a book chapter on it also in the virtual simulation for faculty textbook. And really getting support, if you can go to one of the workshops. We were hosting one May 12th and 13th, and we're in the process of deciding about doing it online, and we will know very, very shortly if it will be online, but it probably will be because there's so much interest in it. Does that answer your question, or do I need?
You answered both of my questions. I didn't get to the second one about the best way to start, and you've answered that. I see that Eva is wondering if the self-debrief questions are part of the scenarios available online.
Yeah. So Eva, on the virtual healthcare experience, under our virtual community of learning, we have simulations that are available, and they are posted there by different faculty. They're not all the ones we have done with our team, but in any of them that our collaborative team has done between Ryerson, Centennial, and George Brown, at the very end is a PDF students can download their summary report, and then it says if you're not going in a formalized debrief, or if your faculty has an organized debrief, here's a self-debrief and self-debriefing questions based on the experience. For you, if you use them with your students, you actually can ask them to submit both these documents. We actually do that in our course, and if they don't, they lose 1% of their final grade, so not high stakes at all. And all our students do it because, you know what, our students love it.
Thank you, Marg. That was really important. I'm also going to take the opportunity, until I see a few more questions, to share. I reached out to my colleagues at UBC in Vancouver, and one of the clinical faculty shared with me that they use the 3 pediatric scenarios for their questions, and they asked 3 questions of the students for the Appendicitis one, what would you assess for if you were a community health nurse, and how would you counsel parents? For the discharge planning pediatric scenario, what would be important to plan for your patient's discharge, such as wound care, activity level, etc. And then for the third community follow-up scenario, what kinds of community follow-up will the patient need once they are discharged? So they had students write up to 500 words responses to those questions, and that's where I see this as being really dynamic. I didn't mention up front, but when I work with faculty, not even just in healthcare, but across the university, there really are some fears about us being replaced. Oh, I'll create this game and I won't be needed anymore. And that's the other thing, you know, simulation is not going to replace clinical, and this type of teaching is not going to replace the need for expert clinician, practitioner, education, or educational faculty to guide students in their learning. And that's Margaret focused on the debrief. But what I also wanted to share was this faculty used this with about 120 students, and the students' comments were that it was the best simulation they had ever done, and the faculty found their responses to those questions to be really well thought out and reflected. When the students compared this experience to some of the packaged materials out there, I'm not going to mention names, but you all know there are packaged materials, they found those packaged materials more frustrating. And what the faculty could glean from it was the students didn't feel they got enough feedback. So again, I think that goes into what our team shared with us about how the games are created. I have been working with teams in Brazil who have created serious games around premature infant care. And again, the thought that goes behind the storyboarding, the coming up with the what ifs, what are the potential responses students might make, and then what happens in each case. And then linking it all to evidence-based practice and your objectives for the scenario. I mean, it is fulsome education at its best. So those were the pieces, and that was Sue Foster. She allowed me, I kept looking for her name. She was in another meeting and going to try to jump on, but Sue Foster is one of our lecturers at UBC doing the pediatric, and I think I shared what she wanted from you. Anybody else have experiences to share? Since I see no other questions right now.
Can I just make one other comment that when we studied faculty across North America that embed virtual experiences in nursing education, one of the things that sometimes do is similar to what you were just talking about, Suzanne, is they do a reflection afterwards, or they have to write something up about their experience, and that actually gets marked and graded. So when you're looking at options on how do you assign marks to this, that might be a really viable.
And I want to mention, team, if you have thoughts, insights you want to add, we're the ones able to talk. Others will have to chat in. I do have another question, though. I'm wondering, you know, these are very heavily nursing focused. Do we have any interprofessional virtual gaming scenarios available, and how might the debrief with that be different?
So we actually created an interprofessional virtual game, and it was more about to learn about with each other and who we are. It will be uploaded on our Virtual Healthcare Experience website as soon as the final pieces are done with it. It's really difficult to have different voices in the video world and different perspectives. I think it's easier in the avatar world and how to do that, right? Like it's because you can make changes a bit easier. There's a disaster game that was out there for a while that you actually could pick who you wanted to be in the scenario, the disaster, so you could really understand their role in it. I think that's coming more. I think it's hard to do though.
And Eva has a great question as well regarding pre-briefing online. Do you do that in a discussion format? What do you provide for students to do as pre-brief?
Yeah, so in ours, because we are in classroom, we're a hybrid, we actually put all the information on their learning management system too. But some of the things with the pre-brief is this, and this is what we've gleaned from nurse educators across North America, is definitely you do the educational part and the pre-brief just like you would, those components that you would do in an in-person simulation. But for the technology, that's the added piece. And of course, grading and how do you debrief, that all has to be told up front in the pre-brief that you give to students. So you could do it on a discussion format. Some of the more complex games that are out there, what faculty do is actually have a short tutorial video on how it's supposed to play out, or a list of instructions or common challenges, and always a resource person to go to if they have technology problems. Definitely as soon as, especially faculty and students are the same, as soon as they know they have someone to go to ask their questions, usually they ask less questions. When they don't know if there's someone they can go to, they tend to get frustrated or ask more questions or emailing more. So as much as you can give them on the onset in that pre-brief, the better. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I see a couple of other folks. Eva says thank you. Corrine, I'm hoping maybe you have another question. Otherwise, did the team have any thoughts about other questions from our members or things that might be of interest? I know you covered it all in your presentation.
I was wondering, Suzanne, if I could just jump in for a second. It's Kim. On the pre-brief, the other thing that you might want to include for the learners is that some of these virtual simulation games are quite triggering. They're quite emotional. Students can become very much immersed in the experience. And so just like we might with our in-person simulations, we offer, like Margaret said, someone that they could contact or refer them to the student support services, let them know that there are resources out there, and if the faculty members assigning the games are not planning on doing a debrief or a formal type debrief, that maybe there's an opportunity for a check-in.
One of the other options someone was writing about, I think it was Gordon, about the virtual synchronous debrief, is that even though you have that virtual synchronous debrief, it's a little different, of course, than an in-person where you can really see people's body language and so forth. And what they're suggesting is that you also give time for one-to-one questions. Or emails or comments or so forth, and that would be helpful. The other thing you will note, and the mental health one, the short clip that you saw, at the very beginning we talk and make a disclaimer that this is sensitive material and that is meant for healthcare providers only that are dealing with it. And with that mental health one and the domestic violence, there's domestic violence in it, we make sure we prepare our students beforehand about the material, but we've talked about it already in class. So it's not brand new material for them. They're just applying their learning in a virtual experience.
And Marg, I think that's a really important consideration. I know I went out and watched the Breaking Bad News one, which is about a cesarean patient a week later that comes in and actually the student finds her dead and starts a code. And I have to say, even as a seasoned practitioner, I was crying. It was very, very emotional. And so it's important that people understand if you're going to use these scenarios, please watch them first. Please understand the environment and context so that you can adequately prepare patients. And then I think, or students, we need to be more sensitive to the fact that we will not be physically present or there as the students are going through this, to pick up on some of those psychological safety responses we might have seen otherwise. And And I'm seeing a lot of thank yous. We're right at 10 o'clock. I'm feeling like we did what we set out to do. Are we ready to end the session and be respectful of people's hour?
Or does anyone else have any other questions? I guess that's what.
Yeah, I'm anticipating. I've done these before, and this is when people feel like we're signing off, and everybody says, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I feel that way, too. I'm incredibly grateful to be part of this team and to have you share your expertise and wisdom on what is a sunny morning for me in Blaine, Washington at the moment.
And it's sunny in the GTA area.
Yay! So stay safe, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I know we had 60 people registered, and this is due to go live in about a week with the YouTube version. If you have any questions or comments, please comment or please connect with any of us on the team. Thank you, everyone. I think we can